to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show planned out today. We're going to be talking about the ragged edge, and I can't wait to do this because I have seen these two guys at the ragged edge before, and I've been there myself, but I can't wait to get into this conversation. It's going to be great. So while I am excited about all these things, I want you all to be excited too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine and Fridays for The Collective. Don't forget, sign up for the reinforcement loop. That way you get your newsletter every week on Monday. Edition 10 just came out on Monday. Really good. Go check it out. Stay in the loop. Other than that, any questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show. And I'm excited to get into this. But first off, Seb, man, how's the Foothills treating you?
Good, man. Got a pretty productive morning here. Satisfied my OCD and cut some grass and did some various items around the house that are needed. And goat pen is almost completed, so we should have our goats and one single sheep in the next couple of days here. And it's looking pretty good, man. It's if I say so myself. And Alex and I really put the sort of the elbow grease in and did a lot of research and tried to do it right. And it's looking pretty good. It's definitely not perfect at all, but it's interesting. I'm driving around the neighborhood here. I'm looking at all the fences everywhere, and I think that I'm not the only one that has had challenges with their fence. There's a lot of ragged stuff going on.
I was going to say, there's nothing perfect in the country. There's always good enough, and that's about as far as it gets.
That's good, man.
Sean, how's the mountain treating you?
Yeah, things are good. Seb sent me some photos of that, of his goat fence and all of the goat stuff, and I quite like it. You know what it does look like? It looks like a legit fence. Mm-hmm. But interestingly enough, when you're driving around, and you know how it is, you're about to build a fence now, all you're seeing is fences for weeks and weeks at a time. Yeah. And so you see fences now, but 10 years from now, you won't even see your own fence. Mm-hmm. And it'll look like the fences that are out there right now that are kind of looking a little bit janky. And 100%. So that's the way of life, hey? I mean, you go all in, you do your best effort, and then you move on to the next thing, and this is life.
Yeah, and then I think from time to time, if you have the luxury of it, having a bit of a reassessment, looking at it, going, hey, where is this like in relation to where it was, say, 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 years ago, for all I care, and then retighten it up. Because I've seen guys do it all the time here. They're walking around, they're walking the fence line. They want to make sure that livestock aren't escaping, doing all the things. And next thing you know, the post pounder is back. A couple guys are on and they're doing it right and sort of fixing it back up. So, I mean, that's very metaphorically applicable to pretty much anything we do.
Yeah, and fencing is a continuous job that never ends. Mm-hmm. Once you think you're sweet, I got my fence complete, I got all the way around, and you get back to the beginning and got to start over. And that's just the way it is.
Well, especially if you have cattle.
Yes, 100%.
And it's not the fence. It's the fence is kind of like tertiary or secondary or third order of effect, because the first thing in the morning that most ranchers do is go walk their property or drive their property or go explore the extreme edge, the ragged edge of their location. 100%. And so Seb, when you and I went down to Haiti, if in fact we did go to Haiti, the very first morning that we were there, I was up super early in the morning before the sun cracked the horizon, and I was walking the entire perimeter just to see what the perimeter looked like, just to see where the gaps were, just to see what the local resources looked like, what the local noises were like, what time in the early morning dogs started barking, what time I could hear people getting up, start cooking. And what the kind of general scene was on our ragged edge of our perimeter. And like, I would do that every morning for sure, anytime that I think I want to keep my space managed. And so that's what the farm is. That's what Haiti is. That's what all of these things are, is a routine. First order of effect is walking your perimeter, as it were. Fences down the line, like second, third, 12th year from now kind of effects. But every morning having that routine of establishing what your boundaries are And if you've got any gaps in your boundaries, you can start that before leaving your house, just with a cup of coffee, sitting down quietly, establishing what the ragged edges or the boundaries are in your mind for that day. How you woke up. Did you wake up open-minded or closed-minded? Or was the fence open or was the fence closed? I mean, there's many metaphorical ways to play with it, of course.
Yeah, of course. And you know what's really interesting with that is you're not picking up on things if you're not engaged 100% in that process. And so that means you're not walking the fence thinking about fishing, and you're not walking the fence thinking about a million other things that you have to do that day. It's basically engaging in the moment and really looking at that fence and looking at the perimeter. And in the case of perhaps, a foreign country where there's risk factors, now you're also looking at your contingency options. You're doing all these things. And so you're creating out of that routine, quote unquote, walk through, and I think that the risk of this is eventually that routine becomes routine. And if it becomes routine, now you're in trouble. And so it's really, I like that because it really challenges me to force everything to return to a focus point, which is, why am I doing this for? So my mission statement, what is my mission execution? Walking the perimeter. I haven't found anything in the last however long, but my job and my point of focus is to find something that's wrong with it. So I'm looking for it, as opposed to, I've been here the last, 5 days and I haven't seen anything.
And you know what? Another common thing is that I just thought of is when a person's on day 3 or day 4 of walking that perimeter, because they've established over 2 or 3 days the pattern that, well, nothing's happening, no fence is broken, nothing's going wrong. I'm in day 4, it's same old, same old. They'll start spending that morning that they're walking the perimeter, walking tomorrow's perimeter in their mind. They're already 24 hours in the future walking the perimeter, expecting nothing again. And you can punch that forward into a decade from now, where you're in your mind walking the perimeter at same old, even though you're only 3 days into the process. You already think 10 years from now is the same old. And so, like, where does it end? Everyone's in the future or the past instead of walking the moment, walking the fence right now.
This it reminds me very much of triage, like when in a mass situation, a mass casualty situation, where you can't really get sucked into any one thing at any point in time. I can't get sucked into helping this one person before I triage everyone that's here. Versus when you wake up in the morning and you go, oh, I got to get this done, and you just start working without having taken the time to run through the process of the day of, okay, well, how am I feeling? Did I sleep well? Did I do these things? So it seems very triage-like in terms of you're stacking your priorities and what you need to do next for the day, first thing in the morning.
So with that in mind, hadn't been in the Army too long, like less than 3 months, when we had that deuce and a half accident where those guys got killed. And so, like, when the vehicle did a 360 in the air, or landed, kind of did a 360 in there, landed on its tires, 3 guys died. A bunch of guys got really badly injured. I made it out with just some concussion and I was just sort of banged up. I wasn't in the hurt locker as compared to some of the guys. So here's what's interesting about that. Within 10 seconds of it happening, I was about to become a guy who was kind of pivotal or was an important member of the moment, who worked on all 3 guys who died and then worked subsequently on a bunch of other guys. I didn't know I was the triage guy. No one told me I was the triage guy. We didn't have any leadership on the scene at the time. And so what I did was I just started working on the very first guy that I saw was in the hurt locker. And then when he died, I just went to the next guy and started working on him. And then the next guy. I didn't know I was triaging anyone. I was just doing what I was doing. I was doing my best. And no one had labeled me as, it's time to triage. In fact, we hadn't been formally taught triaging at the time when I was in the military. I'd learned it as a civilian before I joined the military. And so, as you said, Chance, you kind of get on with triaging the day, or you get on with triaging things. It reminds you of what a triage is. But that's because you know what it is, probably because you've been in the position, or maybe someone has labeled you as, you're going to run this scene and make sure you're triaging. It's easy to triage when you label yourself as the triageur, or when someone says you're now triaging. But when you're walking through life and all of these things are happening to you, unless you tell yourself, I'm triaging every second, then you're not a triager. You're not triaging. These are just things that happen, happenstance. You're in it and then you're out of it and then you don't think about it anymore. So you're labeling it as triage, and I understand that. But most people have never really considered what that means because they've never been a triager. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I actually had a conversation with somebody the other day about first aid in general. I was talking to actually a nurse, and I was stating how mind-blowing it was for me, having grown up with first aid, being out in the country especially. You learn how to do first aid pretty quickly, and you get taught very quickly as well. And then I did first aid before I even got out of high school. Like it's always been in my repertoire, so triage has always been a thing for me. But it took me a long time to realize that most people don't actually engage in first aid. They don't even know how to spell first aid. They would have no idea what to do in the moment. And so you're absolutely right. If you don't actually label yourself as triaging or understand how the process works of prioritizing people or prioritizing injuries or prioritizing your day, then yeah, you're just going to walk through a scene and be that's, I think, where most people freeze up in general in life as well, is they don't really know what to prioritize. What do you got, Seb?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and it has another insidious effect which has the potential to cause even more grief, which is not hurting you but hurting others. You know, when I was thinking about going around the fence and looking at the fence, it occurred to me that I called my neighbor about 4 times last week because he's had cattle on the road, chilling and eating and grazing, and then there was a hole in the fence. And then on the other side of his property, I was out, running after the horses on my side, and I saw a fence post that's leaned over. So that's another possible sort of bleed out area that's gonna create issues for him. And so now my responsibility isn't simply to walk my perimeter fence, but when I'm on my perimeter fence and I have my neighbor's perimeter fence or in the crosshairs, I can also potentially prevent and assist him and vice versa, right? Like, it's not just a one-way street. But the fact is, in the case of something like Shaun, for example, like, obviously, for the good of the collective, jumped in and had to do what had to do, regardless of being entrusted with it or not. But I think that, just like anything else in life, there is not enough preemptive preparation for some of these things. It's like, I'm just going to wish that this never happened to me, as if that was some sort of strategy. And I mean, it can be applied to absolutely anything. But having a general understanding that things will go dicey, not as a matter of if, but when, and where are you going to be, and what is your contribution going to be, and what is the impact of the lack of interest in said contribution are you going to carry over once things are going pear-shaped? And really, looking back, you can't say I did my best, but your best wasn't where it needed to be because you've never really applied yourself and forecasted that was going to be needed, and I think that that's a really good way to live with your head in the sand a little bit. And perhaps they say ignorance is bliss. I think ignorance is deadly.
I'm tracking on this, and I think it's really cool. I like the analogy of the fence line between you and someone else, because it's a known boundary, right? You know where your line ends, you know where their line ends, and they meet up on each other. And so when there's an opening or a gap or something like that, you can point it out to people. And within the collective, I mean, when we sit here and have these conversations, that's what we're seeking, right? We're looking for those boundary lines. We're pushing the ragged edge a little bit. And I wanted to ask you guys specifically about this, because I think most people don't understand what the ragged edge is, because they never actually figured out what their boundaries are to begin with, right? They've only ever done so much and just said, yep, that's cool, I'm good with that, and then never touched it again. I was talking to somebody else about this as well. We were discussing CPR, and they were like, oh yeah, I did CPR years ago, hasn't changed that much, I think I could still do it. I'm like, okay, do you remember how tiring it is? And they're like, well, I don't know, I never actually really physically done it on somebody before. I'm like, oh, well, that's something you might want to think about, right? It's not just an easy, like, oh yeah, I know CPR, I'll never have to use it. There's almost a flippancy to it. And so I wanted to ask you guys specifically, like, when you guys hit that ragged edge, when you guys start to find that edge, what do you guys do? Do you guys sit in it for a little bit? Do you push a little harder to see if that actually is the edge, or do you guys back off a little bit? How do you guys find your edge? Seb, what do you think?
I don't think I'm the right example for control edge attempt at finding. I generally blast right through the doors like a bull in a china shop. So by the time I look back, I'm way past the edge, you know. And I think historically I was definitely like this. I think that, you know, getting older and perhaps, I don't even know if wiser is the words, but certainly more experience in doing it and having paid dearly for crossing it on a GSXR 1000 at high rates of speed, you know, and realizing that I'm 17 miles past the comfort zone and probably in a dangerous position. It probably isn't the best way to do it, but certainly it did allow me to really undoubtedly know where the edge was and how I could negotiate being near it without necessarily falling off the cliff. And, you know, just one thing that somehow squeezed into my mind is the commonality of this in the concept in the context of physical fitness. For example, you know, you tell somebody, you go, okay, I need you to ride the lactic threshold. You know, most people have no idea. It's either completely off the lactic threshold or completely off the other way, you know, off one way, off the other way. You're either spent and done and you need to completely stop and recover fully so that you can re-engage, or you're not even near that line. And so you think you're working hard, but you really aren't. And so I think there is value, especially in safe environments. There is a ton of value in applying these concepts of going a little bit deeper and just see what happens, you know, and really pushing that line. You're going to need that. You're going to need that to establish where the healthy boundaries are. And it's often scary. And if it's scary, it generally has value.
I like that. Shaun, what are you thinking?
So the ragged edge, I think, can more often than not be.
Oops.
It can be.
That was going to be the greatest point ever made.
He's probably still
Interesting.
making it right now. There he is.
Oh.
Now he's not. Okay, well, let's carry on here. We'll see when he gets back if he's got some points on this.
I'm so glad it's happening to him and not me this time around.
And he's got the new computer now too, which shouldn't be going on here. But so, well, let's talk about this just in general then. For those that say have never pushed themselves to that degree, have never actually found that ragged edge, have never gone 17, have never blasted off the cliff, and you and I both know what that's like. But how would you recommend then to someone else who's never been there? How do they develop that skill set?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a trial and error type endeavor, right? But I think that just like anything else in life, the application of brute force and maximum speed is rarely the answer. And even if you look in the tactical context where people say, you know, speed, surprise, and violence of action, like that quote has killed more operators than taking a little bit more of a thought up approach, right? And I'm not saying that if you go live, there is no value in speed, surprise, violence of action. What I am saying is this: you use the concept as a dogmatic concept that you shall abide by every time you deal with a dilemma. I got some bad news. That's killed a ton of guys, you know, because there is a way to take a bit of a tactical pause and see what it is that I'm doing at what velocity here. And so once, you know, say for example, let's make a practical example. If somebody was doing it in the workout department, for example, there is a line between hurling in the bushes and being passed out somewhere and feeling that your legs no longer work and that you're sucking air and all the things, but the stages are going to happen very quickly. So you're going to feel something that's very uncomfortable, and the next push is going to lead you into something that's much more uncomfortable. And so there has to be something that makes you more uncomfortable that you are used to being, but necessarily isn't, you know, going to kill your spirit by getting you passed out on the grass for the next 45 minutes. And so how do you achieve that? Well, this is the trial and error period. And there's really no quick fix to that. This is something that has to be done day in and day out. But quickly, you find these points, you find these check marks, you find these boundaries, and you're able to engage in whatever it is that you are doing with a new reference point, which that reference point is, was initially very, very far away from the boundary, and now that reference point is closer to your real boundary, probably not nearly as close as you think it is, because we're very conservative machines. But it's just a matter of playing with these things and understanding that if you accidentally blow past the boundary and find yourself, passed out on the ground for 45 minutes because you did something, then get back on the boundary setting as soon as you can, because now there's going to be an apprehension is in engaging again on account of, what if I do that again? And I think that the sooner you can clear that up, the better it is. It's a work in progress, and it's a lot of work. There's nothing easy about it, but those are the moments that life is made of. Those are the moments that establishing boundaries for yourself and having your left and right of arc and being able to push yourself and understand what you are capable of is going to be extremely useful, as anything that occurs in life is going to require you to introspect and verify where you fare in relation to how you should be able to act.
I'm really digging this, and I think CQB is actually a really great example of what we're talking about, because you're basically living on the ragged edge through the whole sequence, right? It is not a it's super fun to do in a non-life and death scenario. When it's for real, it's a different game. But I think the skill set, though, that really makes a good operator within the CQB realm is constantly looking for work, right? If you're always looking for something to do, how can I help? How can I engage? Where can I do this? Da, 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 da. I think it applies to life in general, of like, how do you look for work within yourself? Is it always going to be external? Is it always going to be internal? Is it always going to be da, da, da? Could be anything. But as long as we're seeking work, we're consistently evolving, consistently adapting, consistently pushing that boundary a little bit. And I think that's an important part. What do you think?
Oh yeah, man. That's a very willful process. I think that waiting for it to be either pointed out externally, or for you to have suffered nefarious consequences in order to decide that this should be something that is consistently done, I think is key. And just like in the CQB, the day that you think that you got it figured out, you got dilemmas that are coming out, the yin yangs that you have no idea how to address, right? So you have to stick to the fundamentals and the base principles and looking for work, doing all this stuff. But it's going to be the exact same as you are negotiating life. You're going to have to keep yourself in check, especially if you start building that overconfidence that comes as a result of having tested the metals over time and be consistently either successful or at the very least knowledgeable enough to know what you can or can't do.
I was thinking about this from a perspective of qualifications too. This happens a lot of times where somebody they get a particular qualification and they go, okay, cool, I have this now. I don't need to learn anything else. I don't need to evolve in any other way. I'm good to go. I'm a doctor. I'm a physicist. I know what I'm talking about, without any sort of evolution or involvement. And I'm wondering, I'm going to hit Shaun on this one first, but I'm sure you've seen this happen before, right? Where somebody has gotten a qualification and then decided that they were going to skate or ride on that qualification for the next little while. How do we, prevent ourselves from hitting that realm, from allowing that complacency to sit in while pushing that ragged edge to continually learn? What do you think, Shaun?
Sorry about that. I think the internet went down in town, the entire town there for a sec. So not my new laptop.
We were joking about it.
No doubt. I think one of the reasons that can happen is because, particularly when we're talking some form of qualifications or certifications, especially if it's something that is reasonably hard to achieve, like, as you mentioned, physician or doctor, at that point, you've gone through a bunch of different processes and a lot of challenges to get to that, we'll call it, pinnacle of career. And now, like, there's a period of time that I think everyone needs to go through a little bit of a decompress. Like, you don't just hard charge all your way to the physician's office and then just keep on hard charging right until the day you die. That's rare. So someone had to really hard charge to get into their office on day one. Now I need a little bit of time to settle into it. And so it's that period, that liminal space where you're figuring out who you are in your new life that you've been working towards for 7 or 8 years. It's that time that whoever's around you will set the tone for the next phase. So if everyone in your office is settled and thinks that the pinnacle of life is to arrive at that seat and then go no further, well, guess what? That's probably what'll happen, because you've surrounded yourself with people who are thinking like that. And so if you want to see what's around the corner as a physician, then you've got to be around people who are encouraging you to see what's around the corner. And so it doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, what seat you're in. If you are surrounded by people who are sitting in seats next to you who are too settled, eventually you can settle yourself. And that's why I like to have a broad spectrum of friends who at any given time are doing something that encourages me to get my freak on. And so if Seb's having a chill day today, I've got another Seb who is not having a chill day today. And so you've got to have people in your lives that are like fireworks. Every day of the week, you can rely on someone who's a firework, if that's what you choose to engage in that day. And then, conversely, you've got to have someone who's full namaste every day of their week. At some point in their life, they're doing a day off. So you've got this spectrum or this contextualizing of what's super hard and what's super chill. And I think even as a physician, as your example, Chance, as hard as they have to work to get in that seat, it's pretty easy to settle into that seat once you've had such a hellacious pace. And so how do you get out of that settling in phase? Be surrounded by people who are looking for what's around the corner.
Digging it. Sab, you got any points?
Yeah, I would say in sort of direct response to your question, I would say humility is probably the key, right? Humility is the key. So it really doesn't matter what it is that happens and what it is that you achieve. Having the mindset of I don't know anything is very valuable. And I'm gonna disclose something that's might be a bit weird, but for me, it just makes sense. I always despised compliments. I really do. It's not like I'm pretending that I despise compliment. I do not like compliments. And one of the reasons why I do not like compliment is because as a human being, and somebody that has a sort of inherent propensity for pride, because we all do. I feel that compliments really tend to do that sometimes. And you look, let's take a case study, like a very simple case study, but with George St. Pierre and Matt Serra, best example, right? One of the most humble martial artists to ever grace the octagon with his presence, and an incredible human. But when everybody along the way was telling him how easily he was going to beat Matt Serra, George actually stopped sticking to his guns and became that person. He became that person that had already beaten Matt Serra, and he was upsetted big time at the time of his life where there is not a chance that Matt Serra should have beat him, right? And so this is an example of that. It's easy for humans to fall in that trap where you start believing your own hype, so to speak. And so for me, although I do appreciate compliment at face value from a person that's obviously taking the time to exteriorize how they feel, and perhaps the fact that it is a compliment, like, is appreciated, but I much prefer not having those conversations at all, because then it doesn't create a bit of a shoot where I can, all of a sudden find myself taking a little bit more and taking a little bit more and taking a little bit more. And next thing I know, I'm prideful, right? And so I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody else but me, but that's a thing that I've done willfully for many, many years, not truly understanding why I was doing it, but I was uncomfortable with the prospect of building an ego, if that makes any sense. And don't get me wrong, it happened at times, it did. And I took way too much credit for things I did that I shouldn't have, and all of the things. Like I'm not suggesting that it never happened, but I'm suggesting that there's a willful process humility is something that humans have to work hard at. It's not something that comes easily to most people. And don't be confusing self-deprecation with humility. That is not necessarily, so you can have somebody that's extremely self-deprecating. That is not a healthier way to live. But having the ability to maintain a level of humility is extremely difficult and requires a willful process and engagement.
Pride is probably the simplest thing I've ever felt in my life, and I'm tracking with you 100%. It's really easy to get into this, like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I know how to do this. I know how to do that. I'm perfectly capable of doing this. Da, 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 da. And I think this, you almost need to be humbled externally sometimes, a couple of times before you can start to internally humble yourself and go, okay, wait a second, start to rein that back in a little bit, and because otherwise you just, I don't know. I get this likening of I'm going back to horses, but I would rather have a horse pushing forward constantly that I need to rein in a little bit than have one that is down low energy, and I have to try to pick up. That's a lot more work in my mind. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. So the irony of this is that Seb is actually the person who made me get better at accepting compliments, because I was pretty terrible at it. In fact, I was self-deprecating to a point where it wasn't very healthy. And so not only did I not like getting complimented, I would go out of my way to avoid compliments. I'd instantly change the subject. If someone got the word out, hey, good, I'd be looking for a way to, is that a bluebird on the horizon? And it was literally Seb who made me better at this. Like I just didn't know how to gracefully accept thanks or congratulations or good job or appreciate what you're doing. I just wasn't really good at it at all. And it took quite some time for me to be able to say, hey, thank you, man. I appreciate that genuinely. It took me a while for it to become genuine. Like I started trying once Seb started jacking me up. I started trying to get better at it. And for quite a while, it felt like fake-a-roni. Like I'd say it, I'd mean it. It just didn't feel it. It didn't feel like it was what it should be to me. And so I went through a little phase there where it was work, where I literally had to push through my own layers of nonsense in order to be able to now easily say, hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. That was very nice of you to say, or that was very cool of you to say, or whatever. Like I was never good at that. Now, compared to then, I'm like a PhD in accepting it gracefully, but I'm still not good at it, but I'm way better than I used to be. And so there is work to be done. And I don't think that work ever ends, because how I do it now will be different than how I do it a few years from now. And I don't know what that'll be, but it's kind of fun to look forward to it in some degree, where I'll have not just the grace to be able to do it well, but as is my way, I'll find a way to amuse myself with it. And I don't mean like mean spirited, but I mean like own it in a way that is still fun to me, that feels right to me, that feels how I should do it. And how I used to do it didn't feel like the right way to do it. How I do it now feels pretty close, but in the future, I'll figure it out.
I had a conversation with my doc at one point in time about the using the vernacular, like therapeutic vernacular, right? When you're in a conflict state and you need to re-engage, and let's look at it from somebody else's point of view and say, say the words of, I apologize for what I said. I can now see what you're saying. And it feels weird, right? It feels awkward. It feels out of body almost. But what that has to do with is the fact that that is the ragged edge of your psyche. It's the ragged edge of what you know. It's the ragged edge of what you've done before. So, Shaun, actually, you're one of the people that made me smile more. Right? You had this whole campaign of people smiling more, and I was like, I don't smile as often as I should, but that's a ragged edge.
And I'm the wrong guy for it, by the way. Like that was me. I was on my ragged edge, pushing everyone towards their ragged edge of, just smile more, because like I wasn't Smiley McSmiler, but I was on a little campaign myself. And so I figured if I'm on a little campaign, might as well drag along a few friends, see where this campaign goes. And where's the harm in that? Honestly, where's the harm? There was no harm.
No. None at all. Seb, what do you got?
No, I just think that's a hilarious, because if you look at it, I was doing the same with Sean as I was struggling through my own issues of, and I thought somebody should come with me because it's way less lonely. And then Sean did exactly the same, and it's just full circle. And that's where your circle of friends is so critical. And understanding that that person that's pushing you also has work to do in that department, likely or possibly, or at least in something, or had done the work or whatever the case is, and not to take it so personally. But what you're talking about there, Chance, as well, is something that people don't realize. But when you feel the need to win in anything, in a relationship, in an argument, in a discussion or whatever, that is your ego. That is ego driven wholeheartedly. And so you'll see people having such a hard time apologizing, or having a hard time saying I was wrong, or they'll apologize like, sorry if I made you feel a certain way. And that is not an apology, and I think that realizing that we as humans are extremely prone to this, to ego reaction, to ego driven reactions, especially when we're under fire. It tends to happen very quickly. And if one of the things that I realized about myself, for example, throughout the years, is that, and I'm going to make a metaphorical application here with jiu-jitsu tournament, right? I used to go to jiu-jitsu tournament, and my biggest issue in competing wasn't that I couldn't apply my pace to the current situation and use my technical skills to try to make something happen. My biggest issue was when something came at me with all guns blazing, I reacted with all guns blazing every single time. And there is not a single thing you could do or say to make me stop doing that. It was this thing where I was super cool and I could be very flowy and very technical if the person had the same game plan. But as soon as the person's game plan was to come after me as hard as possible, my game plan went right out of the window, And you soon realize, when you start sitting in that position long enough, that is your ego and your pride doing that. There's other factors. So, for example, in law enforcement, when you train, they will often reinforce principles such as, if you find yourself in this position, you're going to die. Because now you have a weapon attached to your hip, and that person could potentially remove that. And so now you're bridging two gaps. You're in a tournament under rules and people that are taking care of your safety, but your cop brain is like, if this was real, I'd be dying, So I'm not saying that there's no complexities around my reaction, but what I am saying is mostly driven by ego, mostly ego driven, mostly pride driven. You don't want to be the person that gives the appearance of getting smoked. You don't want to be the person that gives the appearance of not fighting back. You don't want to be the person that's, who are you to come after me this hard? And what do you think the consequences of that are going to be? So let's compare this to, say, a good friend of mine, an incredible dude, Jason Gagnon, who was number 3 in the world as an IBJJF competitor, as a brown belt in 2013. Just an incredible competitor. And he used to say to me all the time, I let guys beat themselves. Like, they come after me as hard as they possibly can, and I just let them expend all their energy until they're completely dead, and then out technique them. Right. So yeah, for the first 3.5 minutes of the match, or for the first 5 or 6 or 7 minutes of the match, I'm going to look like I'm getting owned by the outside world. But I don't care, because at the end I'm going to either be on the podium or I will lose. Right. And I will look like so you got to pick your poison. Like, do you want to look like you're winning but actually losing, or do you want to look like you're losing and actually win? So I think curbing the ego and realizing what it is that's creating that reaction, and for us to have the humility to go back and say, this was my fault, or at least partially I'm taking responsibility for my piece of the action. I shouldn't have said X, Y, and Z. And that is always a difficult edge to navigate, but it's incredibly important.
Well, I'm digging it. John, what are you thinking?
So one of the key elements of understanding the ragged edge, your own ragged edge, is if you can't discover it by yourself, you can discover it with others. And so that's what Seb just described in a BJJ match. If you're out on the mats by yourself, roly McPoleying and doing BJJ with a invisible shadow, you're not going to learn much. But if there's another human being who's putting the hurt on you, well, now you're going to start learning things. When you've got someone on their ragged edge and you're on your ragged edge and you're sharing a moment, that's where you learn a lot more about your ragged edge. In isolation, out in the middle of the bush, all by yourself at 2300 hours when you're wet, cold, and tired, you can learn a lot about your ragged edge. You'll always learn more if you're with other people. Because even if you're in the hurt locker out in the middle of the bush at 2300 hours, if someone's next to you, they'll either be the same as you, worse, or better. And it doesn't matter what states they are in. Any of those three states will allow you to learn more about yourself. You can use your own imagination as to what those three states can teach you as a reflection, as another person in front of you, what you can learn about the moment when they are overperforming you, underperforming you, or matching your performance. Then you can start thinking about the whys and wherefores. But without that person there, if you're just out there by yourself, the tendency is to focus on all of the minutia. But when there's another person there with you, the tendency is to focus on the other person in the moment, the experience, the things that are going on that are bigger than the tiny little minutia moments. And so, again, if you want to learn a lot about yourself, you can all by yourself. But if you want to expedite that process, find another person who doesn't mind the ragged edge as well, and put your heads together and see what you come up with.
I think this is it's one of the two sides of the same coin kind of deals here. Is that because isolation will teach you a lot, and I look at hunting as a great example, because when I go out by myself, I engage in the hunt very differently. It's a much more, I guess, more of an aggressive style of a hunt. I am searching for an animal. I'm pushing my body. I want to find my own personal ragged edge in those moments of what am I actually capable of doing right now. And when I'm with another person, I am much more, as you said, engaged in the moment. I'm much more, how is this all coming together? There's more pieces here instead of just me pushing my body and I'm going to do what I want to do. And I got to roll with a good buddy of mine, a friend of mine from the Army, came and visited one of my classes, and we were rolling around. We were talking afterwards, and I was like, the ability to find that edge within yourself and find that edge with other people is kind of a coin toss. It's a bit of a, what am I going to look for right now? Am I looking for my own personal edge, or am I trying to find a group edge? And I think that's, I think it's two sides of the same coin. What do you think, Seb? I saw you write something down.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to that one concept that we bring back over and over and over again that you really can't do without, which is called balance, right? Balance is required. It is needed. And so for me, there's two things that are going to play into this. There's the cognitive piece. So if I know that on the last 4 hunts, I was isolating myself and I was really pushing the boundaries of spot and stock and doing all the things, versus now I have an opportunity to perhaps teach or learn from somebody's technical skills and do it a different way, so that, and maybe I want to work on my static hunts or do whatever, right? But I cognitively will know that I spent most of the time doing certain things, and so I should probably engage in that way. But that only works, and it has to be vibed with the moment. Like if it's not the right moment and it's not the moment's passed, or the other person isn't feeding into what's happening, or we're not jiving on whatever it is that should be happening, then it's going to be a different story. Inversely, if I know I've done the same thing over and over again, but now I'm with somebody that is a force multiplier, perhaps I engage again in the same way, But I think ultimately you have, and again, it goes back to that synergy piece, right? Like when you ask somebody reasonably, if you were to dig a trench by yourself, how long would it take, right? Okay, this long. If you were to do it with 2 people, how long would it take? And the answer generally is half the time. But that's not necessarily the case. It could be 3 times faster, right? Depending on synergy. And so the moment and reading into the moment is a critical piece of that equation. But ultimately, though, I think it comes back to a cognitive process called, have I achieved a level of balance? Because that's a willful decision. It's very rarely you achieve balance by accident. You might, but it's not a strategy that I would, recommend. Whereas you have your organic piece, which is all of the things, the underpinnings, and the things that are the intangibles that are by feel, where you're engaging in the moment and doing what you have to do. And then there's the cognitive reassessment of where it is that you are and what you could benefit from, which I believe is a willful decision.
Ooh, I like it. Shaun, what are you thinking?
Well, the willful decision of learning your boundaries is quite important. And so let's just talk about the ragged edge as 2 states. You've got your acute ragged edge, and we'll call it your chronic ragged edge, or something that is short versus something that is really long. Those are 2 different kinds of ragged edges. And so let's break it down into acute. Let's call it a 1-day cycle, a 24-hour cycle. If you want to understand the ragged edge of what 24 hours can bring, go race a 24-hour solo mountain bike race. Now you understand what each second of a day feels like. There's your ragged edge. You want to understand what the ragged edge is over a long timeline? Set yourself a decade-long program and start kicking that arse. Now you understand chronic ragged edge. The outcomes of those 2 ragged edges will look different, not only as physical outcomes of what you produce, but also what happens internally. And by internally, I mean physiologically, psychologically, emotionally. And so this ragged edge concept isn't just like, wow, today I worked super hard for 5 minutes at the grocery store. To me, that's not a ragged edge. And it's not a ragged edge for anyone unless they've tested what their true ragged edge is. So if working hard in a grocery store for 5 minutes is truly your ragged edge, that means that the day before, 4 minutes was hard for you. Now 5 minutes is hard for you. Tomorrow it'll be 6 minutes. Whatever it is, there is no finish line when it comes to ragged edge. You're the finish line, not the thing. And so I think a lot of these finish line outcomes, or a lot of these ragged edge labels, are self-described and self-limiting and are not well understood because the pace actually hasn't been pushed hard enough to understand what the limit is. If someone goes out and walks for 3 hours today and thinks that that's their ragged edge, it is, if that's what they tell themselves. But I'll bet they could double that easily if they had to save the planet. And I'd bet they could walk for 3 days straight and not stop if they had to save the galaxy. And so what is your true ragged edge can only be determined by you and your why.
Then I wonder how much of the ragged edge is then a choice, because if what you're saying is accurate, that means that at any point in time, physical capacity aside, your choice to stop seeking that ragged edge in that moment is your choice. It's not a physical barrier. It's not something that you're going to hit a wall and be like, well, I guess that's as far as I'm going. It's going to be I can't go any farther, or I can't do this anymore, or etc. It's just going to be a choice that you decide that's as far as I want to go right now. Is that accurate?
No, because that is just those words or those sentences only exist if you're the only person on the planet. And so, like, I can be well into something that I'm really engaged in towards the ragged edge, and my wife says, hey, we need to go do XYZ. Well, XYZ is going to get done. And so there's other people on the planet. And by the way, my wife's things may be more important than my things. And so if I'm the only one that's doing all of Shaun's stuff, then I get to decide all of my ragged edges in isolation and not be deterred by the external world. But we live in an external world that has many other people that we play with. And so if if Seb and I are out doing a ragged edge thing, and one of the horses on his ranch starts having a problem, and our ragged edge has to go this direction, well, so be it. That doesn't bother me in the least. So I don't like to think of the ragged edge as like a solo journey that I'm the only one who decides it stops now. That is not the case. It's way more complicated than that.
Seb, you got anything on this?
Oh man, so many things. I mean, it also depends what the wind conditions are and what the consequences of going over are, right? Because we were talking like this is catastrophic. You know, going too hard on your workout and puking in the bushes for 20 minutes isn't catastrophic. This just happens, right? And in some instances, it's quite funny. Anyways, but I believe that the reason why it's so difficult to self-impose it is because of how conservative we are as humans. You know, our survival mechanisms are kicking in really early. As soon as you decide to, for some people, as soon as you decide to put your runners on, the brain's already shutting you down. What are you doing? You experience a certain level of stress. Something must be deadly, you know? And so now you're already starting to self-defeat, so to speak. And that's not everybody, but it does happen, right? And it does happen very early in the game. So what do you know about, you know, my day getting shot like, you know, 16 times and somehow deciding he wasn't going to die, you know? Like, how do you go from that ragged edge to another ragged edge? And I use an absolutely extreme example, and we all know there was a cost to that as well. But the fact is, I believe, and we've discussed this over and over since the beginning of this conversation, is that you're going to need some external calibration. You are going to need to be challenged. And so you have to find something that doesn't give you the choice. Because if you have a choice, you will almost always eventually either self-defeat or take the easy route out early. And that's not to say that you can't push through that and do it longer next time and longer next time, but you are to expedite the process. Get a real crucible, something that you have no control over, something that somebody else is controlling the parameters. And now you're going to go and you're going to find your real boundaries. And I mean this metaphorically. This can apply to physical situations. It can apply to mental and emotional situations. It can apply to a variety of different contexts. Obviously, you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're taking on, that the consequences of going over isn't catastrophic. I mean, that just goes without saying. But and in relationship, it could be, right? So you have to be mindful of that. And of course, balance is the key here. But I think that for us to self-impose, especially for somebody that's never really dabbled with that and pushing the boundaries one side or the other to see what they're capable of, it's going to be very difficult to do that solo, although not impossible. But I think it can be expedited, as Shaun alluded to earlier, by engaging in things that are externally sort of managed or framed. You know, I'll give you a very, very simple example of this. The brain and how conservative the brain can be. So we all know, we all been through many selections, and I was involved in double-digit selections on the teams when I was on the teams. And one of the things that we used to do all the time is we used to establish a clear finish line. We used to say, okay, that run is a 10-kilometer time run, so you have to do it as fast as you can, but also it's only 10 kilometers, right? And no matter how fast or how slow people finished in, they all went faster 2 kilometers from the end, right? Because they had all this energy left to push and do the things. But inversely, once we passed that 10-kilometer mark and we said, psych, we keep going, guys, turn around and head back, 50% of those would quit within the first kilometer. Some of these guys had a very, very easy time running that 10 kilometers. That was nothing that they weren't used to. But as soon as we move the bar from where they had self-imposed a finish line to where the finish line really was now unknown, and they didn't control, as soon as that lack of control or that loss of control occurred to them, then their self-defeating mechanism kicked in. Now the reality is, and I'm not giving anything away because everything has changed, is that run was going to be an extra kilometer, right? Like the idea was to see who would engage in this and say, man, I'm good to go back. Let's go. Let's do this, kind of thing. But this is where our disabling mechanisms are needed to be contended with, and we need to understand that we have that. So how can we, left and right of arc, with the people around us, with the circumstances, with the context that we engage in, to make sure that we push enough that we can achieve the ragged edge and we can find our limitations without imposing them.
That it's a great example, and actually it reminded me of a ruck march I did in training at one point in time. I don't remember the exact length of it, but we were walking towards our barracks at the end of it, and everyone was just like, everyone started to get excited. The pace started to pick up a little bit. Everyone was like, yeah, we finally made it back. Awesome. And the instructors just didn't stop, and they just kept walking right past our barracks, and everyone, you could hear it go down the line. It was just, oh no. And it was interesting because the people that I noticed would like watch it as they went past it, and then tried to like look back, would have the biggest struggles continuing on. But the people that would be like, and keep walking, made it through a lot easier. So that's a fantastic example. Shaun, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Well, that kind of sounds like basic training, which is, sort of where someone learns how to manage these kind of things. And so if you just came out of high school and joined the military, and this is your first moment, you probably will look over your shoulder and wonder what the heck is going on, much like I did. But then years later, as Seb said, running selections in Tier 1 and watching people not look over their shoulder, that's a moment where you watch the candidates and understand that in front of that day or prior to that day, there was a whole bunch of processes that they'd gone through to learn not to look over their shoulder. And that doesn't mean not look over your shoulder in case someone saw you looking over your shoulder. You just don't look over your shoulder because you've been built into the person that doesn't need to look over their shoulder because there is no finish line. You're not concerned about those things. It's come hell or high water time. And so these kind of moments on day one, as you just described, Chance, when everyone's just basically got their fresh haircut, that's when you're supposed to learn. But a decade later, if you're still looking over your shoulder, it means that you missed the education that was being given to you on nearly a daily basis.
Yeah, for free. Like it was just being given to you all day long. Well, first off, we just pounded through an hour there. That was super fast. I didn't realize that we were this close to the time, but thanks, guys. This was awesome. There's so many more points we could hit on here, too, that we can keep going if you guys want to keep going, or we can shut her down for the afternoon. How do you guys feel?
Well, I've got the time.
Seb,
and I've got to make up the time that I missed.
True.
Yeah, I'm good to go for a little bit longer.
All right. So then I have written down here that the edge isn't always big moments. Like we've been talking about kind of like big things and physical challenges or, I guess larger, more external challenges that's going to put you on the ragged edge. But I want to kind of go into the mental side of these things where it is much less a massive leap to get to that ragged edge, because I think we get so stuck in our ways internally that to find that ragged edge emotionally, spiritually, things like that, it is not that far from us. So how would you guys engage those internal edges? Would you do it any differently than you would the physical sides? Shaun, I'll come to you on this one.
Sure. I did it this morning. In fact, just before I came into this podcast, I was editing the footage from my little morning workout on the balance ball. And so if you want to understand your ragged edge, get on top of a balance ball, right on the edge of it, stick your nose over your carpet and see how close you can get to that tipping point of whacking your big nose off the carpet or staying up on top of the balance ball. So this morning's focus was to take my balance to the literal ragged edge as to whether I would fall off the ball or not. And these little tipping points are like half a millimeter. My head just half a millimeter too far forward, or safe just a half a millimeter back. So really, really, really fine tipping points of staying on top of the ball. You can learn a lot about the balance ball. That's why I've been putting some videos up recently. If you haven't tried a balance ball yourself personally, you should try it. You should get up on top of it. You don't have to stand on it or kneel on it. Just sit on it and find a way to stay on it. You'll learn a lot about your day, how it's going to go. If you're not settled, you won't be able to balance on the ball. If you're not centered, you won't be able to balance on the ball. And if you are centered and if you are like holistically put together when you wake up in the morning and you jump on the ball, you feel like you are good. Well, take it to the ragged edge where you are not as good, where you're not as ... This morning, I pushed myself to my edge, as I like to do every single day. And it doesn't require F-16s flying in the background. It doesn't require fireworks or hot air balloons. There's tons of ways throughout my day that I find my ragged edge in all kinds of things. I'll find my ragged edge making coffee. It doesn't have to be like intense, chaotic moments. I can push the envelope when I'm making a basically Japanese Zenorific coffee ceremony. I will push my edge. There's so many ways to do it, but it requires a body of work to start building out a bigger body of work. So in order to play bigger, you've got to start playing for a little while. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm tracking. I like the tea ceremony analogy here too, because for those that have never seen a Japanese tea ceremony, it is a marvel of precision. And if the amount of work and effort and time that goes into preparing a single cup of tea is mind-blowing. But that is a ragged edge in and of itself to find that level of precision. And I love that. It's a great example. Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, not much to add. But what I would say is, as Shaun was speaking in relation to what you were talking, Chance, you know, I started thinking about, say, parenting, for example, which is something that we all at times do well, and other times not necessarily so well, right? And I think that there is room for improvement always, of course, but there is room for self-evaluation, introspection, and realizing how we should be addressing certain things. So I'll take a very example that most people can relate to, which is kids leaving a mess everywhere, right? Everywhere they go, it's like a hand grenade exploded, and all of a sudden, you know, there's no responsibility, because what happens in their little brains that has no consequences attached to is basically, if I decide to do something right now, then instant gratification kicks in, and I'm going to go and do that right now before I forget that I want to do it. Right. And so whatever I was doing before is completely irrelevant. It becomes non-existent. The stuff's fall behind, and I'm gone to the next thing. Right. And this is a societal issue. It's not just a kid's issue. But one of the things that propensities say, in my case, for example, is to be a little drill sergeantess, right? Again, I will tend to, you know, really address this like the guy that when I was 8, I had it all together. You know, my room was spick and span every time I used something or whatever. And so now I'm going to come at that angle with this fake sense of sanitization of my own life, or fake sanitization rather of my own life, and how I interacted with the world at that age. And now I'm going to be, you know, puffing my chest, getting ready to go have that conversation. And sometimes for me, testing that edge is simply taking a moment, taking a tactical pause, and say, how did you run your program when you were 8? Like, be honest, right? Like, what were some, and I remember my room looking like I blew out grenades in there until I was like 17, right? Like, really, if I'm being honest. And so now it's not about not having the conversation and try to teach a teaching point, but the way that I'm coming at it, and the angle that I use, and the words that I use, and the intonation and the tonality, everything is in line with somebody that's taking the time to reflect before having a massive emotional reaction. And the emotional reaction is way easier It's way easier for you to just lose your mind and say you know how I know that it's easier? Because your mom did it, you did it, your grandma did it, everybody does it, and it never changed anything. It never has. Every single one of those generations did exactly the same thing, some more than others, right? And so I guess the point I'm making here is that these things don't have to be massive things, but they can be small things. How can I be more controlled in my approach on this? Or how can I be more tempered? Or how can I be more balanced? Well, the balance starts with the introspection, the will to want to know if there is any way that you can do it better. And then comes the piece about being honest about your situation. So if you're going back in time in your head and you remember the time that you spent 3 hours cleaning your room as the outlier, but the rest of the time the place was an absolute mess, you're actually feeding into your own narrative here. We have to be honest with ourselves. That's second, right? Like, was I the epitome of cleanliness when I was 8? The answer is absolutely not. I was not, right? And so now I've just sort of notched myself down a bit, which is again feeding in that concept of humility. And now I'm heading over to have that conversation in a very different tonality. All of it extremely uncomfortable because I just want to lose my mind and turn into a dragon, right?
It's so much easier to yell and scream and try to force something through, and like it's a pretty beginner mindset. If it's not working, do it harder. Like
what is the quote again? Everybody favors the application of brute force until they have a mosquito on their junk.
Oh, I like that one. Brute force works great until it's a sensitive area. That is for sure. I got a couple comments here that I want to touch on. They're just fantastic, along with what we're talking about. Sats jumped in here earlier. He said, "Good morning, team." I didn't see that. Good to see you, buddy. And then we got Megapixel Sniper. This is Pat on the Instagram side. And he said, "I came into this conversation late, but one thing that I do know, we have yet to see the true potential of the human being and the human spirit. Every year, every moment, exceed what we have done in the past as a collective. I'm always excited to see where the new bar will be set in the future, as long as humans believe that there is a frontier beyond the normal." And I really like this concept of a frontier beyond the normal, because we get stuck in the normal. A lot of times we get used to what is now normal. And that could be anything. Like, I'm sure the citizens in Kyiv right now, their normal is very different than our normal, right? But that it's become a normal because it's now normal, versus prior to the war, it is less, it's definitely a different type of normal. So there's got to be a frontier beyond it. Shaun, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Why I like that from Pat is because he understands what he just wrote. Whereas a lot of people will read that and not understand what he was saying. And why Pat understands that is because he was in Kansoff-Com, where he was surrounded by humans that are not normal. And I mean not normal in the sense of the average person. And so it's, for me, that idea of being in Kansoff-Com or in any elite organization, one of the benefits of being in those organizations is not so much what you learn specifically, it's what you learn about humans all around you. And I'm much like Pat. Once I got introduced to the unrealness of what humans are capable of, what I thought was almost superhuman like, once I saw that, you can't unsee it. And then once you've seen superhuman like efforts with superhuman like outcomes, the kind of normal stuff sort of bores you. I'm bored by normal. I'm bored by mediocrity. And therefore, my ragged edge has been defined by the superhumans that I was surrounded with back in the day. And once you're there, you can't like go backwards 27 steps and live in that life. And so it's kind of a blessing and a curse to be introduced to organizations or be surrounded by people who are superhuman to some degree. Because once you've tasted it, you don't want anything else other than it. And so, much like Pat says, I think the frontier is where it's at for me. And by frontier, I mean like trying to carve it myself, not just be in the frontier, but like be the frontier. And that doesn't mean that I am the frontier. It just means that if I feel I am the frontier of my own life, then certainly the people that I'm hanging out with at that moment are the people that I chose to hang out in my frontier. Whether they were there before me or not, whether they preceded me or not, is not important. If they showed up with me at the same time is not important. If they showed up 7 years later, after I was already in the frontier, that's not important either. All that's important to me is that I feel that I'm at the frontier and that the people around me are the right people.
So I have a thought on this, and we're talking about the frontier, this is the thing that clicked in my head, is that I'm thinking cowboys. I'm thinking back in the day, the Wild West, even prior to that, when it was literally wild land, where you were in, it was literally wild. And I'm wondering how much the draw to that wildness stems from this kind of need to be on the edge, this desire, I guess, to test yourself, to see what's capable, is to almost amalgamate yourself back into the wild versus the normalcy of civilization, right? You go from a completely anything can happen at any point in time to you can expect tomorrow to be exactly like today. And finding that edge where you're comfortable is that kind of return to the wild, return to the instinctual mind, I guess. What do you guys think? Seb, I'm going to come to you on this one.
Yeah, a few things. So on Pat's comments, of course, he is absolutely right. One of the things that I would like to point out is that it feels like we're regressing in a lot of ways as a society, right? When it comes to pushing the envelope. And I do believe that the more we turn society into a society of victims, the less we're going to have those incredible moments that we've had, throughout centuries before that. And that's something that we need to be very aware of. Now, one of the examples that came to mind in relation to this as a blatant example of this was the 4-minute mile, right? And we've all heard it a million times. This was impossible. Doctors said it was impossible. Everybody said it was impossible. But some guy thought he could do it, and he did. And when he did, 10,000 other people did it, right? All of a sudden. And so this again speaks to the catastrophic consequences of labeling at times, right? Like all of a sudden you self-impose a label, or society imposes a label, and it becomes an impossibility, and therefore you take it as such, and you might have been the one capable of doing it, but because you didn't have the self-belief to even engage in it and do it, you're missing the boat. And then as a society, we miss the boat. So we all don't elevate on account of everybody thinking that this wasn't doable, as opposed to just doing it, And I think that that's a trap that humans have a tendency to fall into, and it's very much cyclical. As far as what you were talking about, Chance, as the frontier and the Wild West and all the things, and I love when we talk about this stuff. I don't know if you know this about me, but I am extremely passionate about Wild West. Anyways, I'll tell you all kinds of stories. But one of the things that comes to mind is 1,000 Ways to Die. I don't know if you've ever watched this, but it is hilarious because it exemplifies exactly what it was like to be alive in the Wild West, and what are some of the things and the cause of death of the people doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But really, this is 150 years ago. It's not that long ago. Like, we're not talking about, but for the 1,000 years before that, we were facing lethal threat at every corner. And for 100,000 years before that, it's just a very interesting time that we're in right now, where we're so safe and so sheltered and protected and all of the things that there is. Actually, I was reading on an airplane a couple months ago a study that seems to indicate, and again, there's going to be counter studies and all kinds of things, but there is this study that seems to indicate that brain sizes are shrinking on account of having less need for survival, and that as a general rule of thumb, the people that are engaged in jobs where survival is at the forefront tend to have a slightly larger brain, especially in a specific area. Now, don't quote me on this, and I can't tell you the name of the study, but you can certainly look it up. But apparently that's a thing where we are starting to lose areas of our brains physiologically that historically have served the purpose of keeping us alive because we have less of a need for it. And so there is an inherent risk in not having external factors influencing our ability to push against the edge. And those risks are real. And once we sort of regress and go backwards, what is now the fix to that? And I don't know from an evolutionary standpoint if there is a fix to that on a short term. There might be on the long term, but things would have to change catastrophically, or at least in a very, very meaningful way for us to see repercussions of that. And so what does that leave us? Well, it leaves us the ability that we have to push these boundaries ourselves. So I'll give you an example of this. After I retired from policing, a fear that I once had, which was to be in airplanes, had completely disappeared during my service. I even was an air marshal. I did all of the things. But when I retired and there was nothing threatening my life on the daily, I started, being nervous on a flight for the first time in, I don't know how many flights, like thousands, really, right? And so now I started realizing what's happening here is I'm now comfortable with my life, and I've now forgotten that there are things that can hurt me. And now I start essentially nickel and diming the risk management piece, right? Where I'm taking all the things that ever caused me a wee bit of concern from an evolutionary standpoint, and I'm trying to, I'm essentially at the mercy of them, so to speak, to a certain extent. Of course, it's not going to stop me from doing it because, of course, courage is in the absence of fear, right? But the fact is, that's when I was pitted against, you need to be doing things that actually elevate the risk, because you're so safe that it's detrimental. I need you to do things, and that could be anything. It could be you running an ultra. It could be getting in a boxing match. It could be jumping out an airplane. It could be riding a motocross. It could be, there's a million things that can be done, or a mountain bike, or whatever the case may be. But keeping that alive, and I think Shaun is a great example of that, because imagine at his age, like let's go around and start polling 60-plus-year-olds to see how many of them are freaking you cannot keep up with on a track going down a mountain, right? But very little of the rest of his life has changed on account of consistently pushing that little piece. And so this is where our comfort and what we seek becomes the creator of the problem that we are trying to solve.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know if you guys have watched 1885, the Yellowstone prequel.
1883.
1880. That's 1923. Anyway, the point is, like, throughout that show, they do this whole friggin' trail ride across the West, and they're pushing up to Oregon, doing the whole Oregon Trail thing. I think it was only like 6 people made it out of 100, and they died all kinds of ways, to your point. And that is a key piece of this, is that there's no... You could technically live in the Western world and not push yourself in any degree in any area, and you could live to be 80, 90 without much of an issue. And I think that is the issue. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
Well, other than just willingly trying to die, I mean, I feel like I've pushed the pace pretty freaking hard. And here I am, and not dead yet, as the old saying goes. And there's reasons for that. There's reasons that I'm not dead yet. And it's because I'm freaking stubborn. I want to see the end of my days. I'm curious as to what I've got in the tank. And so if I didn't have all of those curiosities, if I wasn't interested in my ragged edge every day, wow, I consider that as not alive. And so if you do make it to 90, that's 90 years of not being alive, in my opinion, unless you pushed your envelope, unless you played with why you're here. Because if you're just here, if you're just like tomorrow's going to...
Oh, and I think there goes
Since you're doing it wrong.
Oh. You back with us yet? I think he's good. No, he's still frozen. Okay. Yeah. There he is. we didn't get the last part there, Shaun, but I think we got an idea of what we're talking about here. I have a question from the Instagram side that I want to put up, and I want to ask you guys before we shut her down for the afternoon. And it's from Daniel Levante. Good to see you, buddy. It's been a while. He says, indeed true. PJ's talking about Pat's comment earlier. Once you push towards the unknown, the uncomfortable, a new standard / attainment is achieved, only to become a new norm to push forward always. And then he says, small question for the gents. Has there ever been a limit that could not be attained, where reflection towards a different path had to be sought out? What do you think, Shaun?
So, has there ever been a time when a limit could not be attained? No, because I could have limits right now within 60 seconds just by pushing my pace harder. And so there's always a limit to hit. There's always a rev meter to hit. I can easily do that today multiple times. It's just a matter of how hard I want to push. Do I want to push beyond my perceived limits a dozen times today? I could easily do that. I've just got to tell myself that that's what I'm going to do. I want a dozen limits smashed today. If that's what I tell myself, that's what I'll do. But it requires the request. I've got to request myself to push that envelope. I can't just wake up in the morning and assume that things are just going to happen. Like, I've got to make them happen. And by make them, I mean manifest them into outcomes. And those outcomes could be, I want a baker's dozen of cracking through some limits. Nothing will happen unless you make them happen.
Love that. Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm taking it too literally, but let's go with it anyways. If you set yourself to fly across the Atlantic Ocean with your arms only, that is an impossibility, right? However, what it comes down to is the mission statement and the mission execution and the way in which you're going to accomplish whatever it is that you set yourself for. So if you have the flexibility and the creativity, you can make almost anything happen, provided that it's actually feasible, right? But I think this is where the line has to be drawn. Is it's easy to self-defeat on account of something that you self-impose as impossible that becomes like flying over the ocean, but often isn't. And so this is where the magic happens, is you need to understand that when you set forth to do something, you're going to have a gazillion inclines to cancel or to self-defeat out of that process until you get very, very used to doing that. And so there's always a way to disable, and you become your own worst enemy. And that disabling mechanism kicks in all kinds of different ways, and it will hit you from all the angles so that you feel great about yourself when you make a decision to stop, right? But what we need to understand is that if I set forth to go through a concrete wall with using my head only in a physical sense, it's never going to happen. But if I say I need to get through that concrete wall using my head, as in my brain, to figure out a way to make it happen, then it can always happen, right? And so I don't know if I got the question a little too literally, or if that's what sort of Daniel was onto. But I think that two things as a reiteration. One is, if you set yourself a truly impossible task, not something that people say is impossible but really isn't necessarily, versus something that's absolutely impossible, and you're not willing to change the mission execution or change the way by which you're going to accomplish that, then you're your own worst enemy. You're taking something on that's unreasonable, and when I say unreasonable, I mean impossible, actually, physically, physiologically, or whatever the case may be. And then you're not applying a filter of finding alternative ways to make it happen. So therefore, the reason why you're failing is because of you. If you take something that's actually feasible, although very difficult, and you are not flexible on your execution, again, you're going to face the same prospect. If you are flexible with your execution, you can find a way around whatever it is so that you can accomplish whatever it is that you set forth to accomplish.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I was really focusing on where reflection towards a different path had to be sought out. And I was like, that is how you defeat a limit. You reflect on it towards a different path and you still defeat that limit.
Yeah. And here's the thing, Ian, in a sense, if you achieve the same outcome, you haven't, like, that limit was reached, but you have accomplished a mission. So what it is that you set forth to do, and why do we care so much about how we're going to get to do it? And so the reflection, the reflection or the introspection and the selection of an alternative modus operandi or an alternative concept of operation in reaching that mission statement is a part of the process. That's an expectation. That is not, that is not the norm. It's generally it should be an expectation that there has, and that is why contingency planning is key, right?
Yeah, 100%. Shaun,
So the danger is, at what point you reflect and decide to go on a completely different path. Let's say you're about 12 seconds into the quote unquote impossible mission, and you just kind of shrug your shoulders and say, I'm going to have to do it a different way. And then 12 seconds later, I'm going to have to do it a different way. And then 46 seconds later, you're heading on a 90-degree angle away from what you wanted to do on such a different path that the outcome is radically different than what you were asked to do initially. And so the penchant is, or the commonality in the average world, I'll say, is to too quickly look for a different path that takes you to a different outcome, which is different than taking a different path to get to the same outcome that you initially set. So achieving your outcome is what we're talking about versus quickly
I think he froze once again. His internet's not doing well today.
Easier, that creates a different outcome.
Yes, 100%. Now, I think we're running short on time here, but I have a couple comments from Pat that I want to jump on real quick. He says, here's the funny, weird context in how I quit a 300 milligram a day nicotine habit or hobbit. I thought if I crash a bush plane tomorrow and had no dip in my lip, would I die? No. So I quit dip that day. And he says that no nicotine aids, needs no crutches. Sometimes it's just an exercise in context, which I think what you're saying, Shaun. It's an exercise in context at that point. Is that accurate? Yeah. Okay. Now we're at just about an hour and a half now, and I just want to say thanks, guys, because I love sitting around talking with you boys, because it's so easy. We can talk basically about anything, and it's turns into a really excellent conversation. Any final thoughts? Anything still burn in the back of your brain? Anything at all? Seb?
I guess my only final inject would be just remember that we are conservative machines. We are extremely conservative, and we're going to get scared of things real quick and disabled real quick as a result of fear, of anxiety, apprehension in relation to anything, whether that's becoming a better person or jumping out of an airplane or doing whatever it is that you set forth to do. And so understanding that is the first part of a very powerful reframe, which is we are very, very far away from that fatal, point, so to speak. And so the fear will kick in as you are putting your shoes on to go to the gym. Death will occur once you bench press 500 pounds with no spotters and drop it on your head. So you're right now, your 5 minute on the treadmill isn't going to kill you. So, and if it does, it was just meant to be. There's nothing you could have done, so you can't control that. But the fact is, understanding how conservative we are as humans and how quickly fear and disabling mechanisms will kick in can really help you reframe when they start kicking in, for you to have the little voice inside to override the voice that's telling you that you can't.
Love it. Shaun, any final thoughts?
Well, I took the town's internet to the ragged edge. Apologies about that. All I'll say is this, that I'm going to echo what Seb just said, or what I heard is this: the very few humans actually understand their ragged edge. I'm constantly trying to re-understand my ragged edge for today, for this week, for this month, for this year. And I've been pushing my ragged edge for a long time. and I still am looking for areas to improve my ragged edge. Never think of ragged edge as a negative. Think of it as a positive. It's where your ego and your psyche and you as a human being get that perfect confluence of, is this what I actually am about? Is this actually who I am? It's probably one of the few areas in my life where I see myself completely. When I'm on my ragged edge, I see Shaun way clearer than I see Shaun when I'm just kind of chillaxing in my air-conditioned office. And so best to get out of the air conditioning, go do something bonkers that isn't catastrophic, and learn about yourself on your own ragged edge today.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add other than the fact that, you know, on Friday we talked about walking the walk, and I think that's what the ragged edge is. You're just walking the walk. You're walking your talk. If you believe that this is something you want to do, then go to the ragged edge and find out, and you'll learn real fast. So I just really appreciate the conversation. This has been another good one. So Seb, Shaun, thank you very much. And to all the people commenting and stuff like that, I appreciate your comments and love all the questions. We'll shut her down for today. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week.
Ciao.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.